Could only 4 words provide clues to help unlock the case?
Initial investigation indicated it was the co-pilot who basically spoke the last time it was recorded on tape.
But those weren't the last words. The report was wrong. 2 weeks later, authorities issued a stunning correction. And now, over a decade later, new breakthrough technology may have finally tracked MH370's exact path, revealing a chilling 20-minute secret that could solve aviation's greatest mystery. Here's what we discovered. The last call. Good night, Malaysian 370. 5 words. Calm, professional, utterly ordinary. At precisely 1:19 a.m. Malaysian time on March 8, 2014, these became the last words heard from the cockpit of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The voice came through clearly to Lumpur radar, Malaysian air traffic control, acknowledging a routine instruction to switch radio frequencies as the Boeing 777 crossed from Malaysian into Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea.
According to CNN aviation correspondent Richard Quest's book, The Vanishing of Flight MH370. MH370 was a red-eye flight, taking passengers from the capital city of Kuala Lumpur to its destination in Beijing, China, with a planned arrival time of 6:30 a.m. local time.
Malaysian Air Traffic Control had instructed Malaysian 370 contact Ho Chi Minh on frequency 120.9. Good night. The response was textbook perfect, standard aviation protocol. No hint of distress, no irregularity whatsoever. The Malaysian government would later confirm that the communication adhered completely to normal procedures and showed absolutely no abnormality. And then, approximately 7 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., MH370's transponder went dark. The massive aircraft, carrying 239 people from over a dozen countries, vanished from civilian radar screens. Someone in that cockpit had deliberately altered the flight path. The transponder didn't malfunction, it was switched off. The plane didn't continue toward Beijing, it turned back, crossing the Malay Peninsula, heading west into oblivion. No distress signal was ever sent, no emergency call, no hijacking code, just those 5 routine words, and then silence that would last more than 11 years and counting. But here's what makes this even more unsettling. Those weren't even the words initially reported. In the confusion following the disappearance, early reports from Malaysia Airlines on March 17, 2014 suggested the last words were, "All right, good night," a more casual phrasing that immediately fueled speculation about distress or irregularity due to its informal tone. The correction came 2 weeks later when Malaysia's Transport Ministry released the full cockpit air traffic control transcript on April 1, 2014, clarifying the exact wording and insisting the communication was completely normal, but the damage was done. Theories of hijacking and pilot distress had already taken root in public consciousness, theories that would only multiply as the investigation revealed more troubling details. And there's another mystery embedded within this mystery. We still don't definitively know who spoke those final words. Initial Malaysian investigations reported on March 17, 2014, used voice analysis to suggest it was the co-pilot, 27-year-old First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, who delivered the final transmission. However, later accounts, including summaries of the official transcript, attribute the transmission to the captain, 53-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah. The official transcript itself doesn't explicitly identify the speaker, and Malaysian authorities have never provided further clarification beyond those early analyses. Let me take you back to that night to understand who these 2 men were and what was about to unfold. Kuala Lumpur International Airport, just after midnight, the air thick with humidity. Flight MH370 sat at the gate, a massive Boeing 777-200ER, one of the most reliable aircraft ever built. This particular plane could carry up to 282 passengers, but tonight it was relatively light, with 227 passengers and 12 crew members preparing for the 6-hour journey to Beijing. The passenger manifest read like a United Nations directory. Over 2/3 were Chinese nationals, 153 people returning home or traveling for business. There were Malaysians, Indonesians, Indians, Americans, Canadians, French citizens, and passengers from over a dozen other countries, young couples on honeymoons, engineers heading to conferences, families reuniting, each with their own story, their own reason for choosing this particular red-eye flight. 4 ticketed passengers never showed up, their seats reassigned. In hindsight, those 4 people made a decision that would save their lives. But 2 other passengers boarded using stolen passports, a detail that would spark immediate speculation about terrorism, though investigations would later determine these individuals were likely just migrants trying to reach Europe illegally, not terrorists. In the cockpit sat the 2 men whose names would become forever associated with this tragedy.
The captain was 53-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah. With over 8,000 flight hours in the Boeing 777 and over 18,000 total flight hours in his career, Shah was the senior pilot on board.
Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was 53 years old, a veteran pilot who'd been with Malaysia Airlines since 1981. With over 18,000 total flight hours, including more than 8,000 specifically in the Boeing 777, he was one of the airline's most experienced commanders. Colleagues described him as meticulous, professional, and passionate about aviation. He'd even built his own flight simulator at home, a detail that would take on ominous significance later. But there were troubling signs beneath the professional veneer. His marriage was deteriorating. His wife, Faiza Khanum, later told investigators he had retreated into a shell in the weeks before the flight, spending hours alone with that home flight simulator. His daughter would describe their last conversation as disturbing, saying, "He wasn't the father I knew. He seemed disturbed and lost in a world of his own." There were other concerning details too. Shah had left nearly 100 public messages on the Facebook pages of young models, one of whom had barely turned 18, with phrases asking when they would be in Kuala Lumpur next and commenting on their bodies and attire. A colleague told the New Zealand Herald that Shah's marriage was troubled, that he'd had affairs with flight attendants, casually adding, "His wife knew." Shah was also politically active, a fervent supporter of Malaysian opposition figure Anwar Ibrahim. On the very day MH370 took off, Ibrahim was convicted for sodomy in a Malaysian courtroom, an allegation most of his supporters agreed was politically motivated. The timing was eerie, though investigators never established whether Shah attended the trial or if the political disappointment played any role in what happened next. And then there was the flight simulator, the one Shah had built himself at home, where he'd spent increasing amounts of time in those final weeks. Investigators would later discover something chilling on that simulator, a route into the southern Indian Ocean remarkably similar to the path MH370 would ultimately take. Sitting in the first officer's seat was 27-year-old Fariq Abdul Hamid, young, enthusiastic, with 2,763 total flight hours, but only 39 hours in the Boeing 777. This was actually his first flight in the massive aircraft without a supervising instructor, essentially a final check ride, before being certified to fly the 777 independently. CNN correspondent Richard Quest had met Fariq just 2 weeks earlier and described him as a charming, unassuming young pilot, excited about this milestone, about the opportunity to fly to more exotic destinations that came with piloting larger aircraft. Fariq had no concerning history, no red flags, no troubling behavior patterns. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh on frequency 120.9. Good night. Good night. Malaysian 370. The voice was calm, professional, unhurried. The communication adhered perfectly to standard aviation protocol. There was no dramatic final plea, no revelation, no hint of what was to come, just a routine acknowledgement of a frequency change spoken by a professional doing their job, and then silence. 7 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., MH370's transponder went dark. The plane vanished from civilian radar, but it didn't vanish completely. Military radar tracked the aircraft as it made a sharp left turn, deviating dramatically from its planned route to Beijing. Instead of continuing northeast toward China, the plane turned back, crossing the Malay Peninsula, heading west over the Andaman Sea. Someone in that cockpit had deliberately altered the flight path. The transponder didn't malfunction, it was switched off. The turn wasn't a navigational error. It required manual input or reprogramming of the flight management system. For the next 7 hours, MH370 would fly on, tracked only by satellite handshakes with an Inmarsat communications satellite, automatic pings that revealed the plane was still airborne but provided no information about exactly where it was or what was happening on board. No distress signal was ever sent, no emergency call, no hijacking code. Whoever spoke those calm, professional words knew exactly what they were about to do, and 238 other people on that aircraft had no idea their routine flight to Beijing was about to become aviation's greatest unsolved mystery, the beginning of the end. When MH370 failed to check in with Vietnamese air traffic control and didn't arrive in Beijing at its scheduled 6:30 a.m. landing time, the initial response was confusion rather than alarm. Communication glitches happened. Maybe the pilots switched to the wrong frequency. Maybe there was equipment trouble. Surely the plane would appear on radar somewhere, anywhere, but it didn't. What followed was a search operation unlike anything aviation had ever seen. The initial search focused on the South China Sea, where the plane should have been based on its last known position. happened. Ships from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Singapore, and the United States combed the waters. Aircraft flew search patterns covering thousands of square miles. Families waited desperately for news. Days passed. Nothing. Then military radar data revealed a truth that shifted. The entire search operation, MH370, had turned back. The aircraft had crossed back over Malaysia, heading toward the Andaman Sea. The search area shifted west, focusing on the Indian Ocean side of the Malay Peninsula. Ships repositioned, aircraft redirected. Still nothing. Finally, analysis of those satellite handshakes with Inmarsat provided the breakthrough that was also a death sentence for hope. Using Doppler effect analysis of the satellite signals, measuring how the frequency shifted as the aircraft moved relative to the satellite, engineers calculated that MH370 had flown south for hours after losing contact, eventually running out of fuel somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean, one of the most isolated places on Earth, thousands of miles from the nearest land, water depths reaching 6,000 meters in some areas. The implication was inescapable. Everyone aboard had perished, and finding them would require searching an area of ocean floor larger than many countries. From 2014 to 2017, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau led an underwater search operation that became a testament to both human determination and the ocean's ability to keep secrets. Using autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with sophisticated sonar, search teams methodically mapped 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, an area roughly the size of England, in water depths reaching 6,000 meters. The searchers found shipwrecks from centuries past. They mapped geological features never before seen by human eyes. They discovered a 19th century anchor resting on the sea floor. They catalogued underwater mountains and valleys and plains, but they didn't find MH370. In January 2017, after nearly 3 years and over $200 million spent, the search was suspended without finding the main wreckage. For the families who'd waited years for answers, it was crushing. For the investigators who'd devoted their careers to solving this mystery, it was agonizing. In 2018, a private company called Ocean Infinity resumed the search under a no-find, no-fee contract. They would only be paid if they located the wreckage. Using even more advanced technology, they scanned an additional 112,000 square kilometers. Month after month, the autonomous vehicles descended into the darkness, their sonar painting pictures of the ocean floor, searching for any sign of a Boeing 777. Again, nothing. But while the main wreckage remained elusive, pieces of MH370 began washing ashore on distant beaches, confirming what the satellite data had suggested. In July 2015, a flaperon, a crucial part of the aircraft's wing, was discovered on Réunion Island, a French territory off the coast of Madagascar, thousands of miles from where the plane disappeared. French authorities examined it carefully. Serial numbers matched. It came from MH370. Over the following months and years, additional pieces were found scattered along the western Indian Ocean coastline. Fragments in Mozambique, South Africa, Mauritius, Tanzania, all consistent with debris drifting westward across the ocean from a crash site somewhere in the southeastern quadrant. These fragments told a story, though not a complete one. The damage patterns suggested high-speed impact with water, though some analysts argued the evidence could be consistent with a controlled ditching attempt, but they couldn't pinpoint where the plane went down. Ocean currents are complex, unpredictable. Debris can drift thousands of miles over months and years, making reverse tracking nearly impossible. Into this vacuum of certainty rushed theories, some plausible based on available evidence, some wildly speculative, all reflecting humanity's inability to accept that a modern airliner could simply vanish in the age of GPS and satellite tracking. The pilot's suicide theory emerged early and has gained the most traction among investigators and aviation experts. The circumstantial evidence is substantial. Captain Shah's home flight simulator contained a route into the southern Indian Ocean remarkably similar to MH370's final path, discovered by FBI forensic analysis of his computer. The deliberate nature of the aircraft's deviation from its planned route suggests someone with extensive piloting knowledge and access to the cockpit controls. Shah's personal life showed multiple signs of crisis: the deteriorating marriage, the concerning behavior toward young women, the withdrawal his family described in those final weeks. His favored political leader was convicted the same day MH370 disappeared. Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott stated in 2020 that top Malaysian officials believed from early on it was a murder-suicide, though publicly they couldn't say so. The political and financial implications were too severe, yet no suicide note was ever found, no manifesto, no final message explaining why. And investigators note this isn't uncommon in aviation murder-suicides. Pilots who commit these acts rarely leave explanations. The 495-page Malaysian safety Safety Investigation Report, released in 2018, was exhaustive, but frustratingly careful in its language. It concluded the aircraft's path was manually altered by someone with aviation knowledge, that communication systems were deliberately disabled, that the plane flew for approximately 7 hours after losing contact before likely crashing after fuel exhaustion. But the report stopped short of naming who did this or definitively establishing motive, stating only that they found no evidence of pilot misconduct that definitively proved Captain Shah or First Officer Hamid was responsible. This careful language reflected political and legal realities. Definitively blaming Shah would expose Malaysia Airlines and the Malaysian government to massive liability claims from families of the victims. But other theories have persisted, each with their proponents: hijacking or terrorism. The two passengers with stolen passports sparked immediate speculation. Some theorists point to the 20 employees of Freescale Semiconductor aboard, suggesting corporate espionage or technology theft motives. But investigations determined the passport users were likely just migrants, and no terrorist group ever claimed responsibility. Mechanical failure and hypoxia. A catastrophic failure, perhaps a fire from the lithium batteries in the cargo hold, could have incapacitated the crew through smoke inhalation or rapid decompression, turning the plane into a ghost flight on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. But this theory doesn't explain the deliberate turn, the transponder shutdown, or the simulated data. Military shootdown. Some conspiracy theorists suggest the plane was accidentally shot down during military exercises and a massive cover-up ensued. No evidence supports this, and it contradicts the satellite data showing hours of continued flight. And then there are the truly outlandish theories: alien abduction, UFO involvement, secret government facilities. Viral videos have circulated online claiming to show the moment MH370 disappeared, featuring strange orbs and portals. All have been thoroughly debunked by investigators and video analysts as CGI hoaxes using stock footage and special effects. But in 2024 and 2025, two new theories emerged that have reinvigorated hope for finding the aircraft. In August 2024, Dr. Vincent Line, an Australian oceanographer from the University of Tasmania, announced via LinkedIn that he believed he'd found MH370's location using bathymetric analysis. Line's theory centers on a geological feature called the Broken Ridge, an underwater volcanic plateau in the Indian Ocean with steep escarpments and deep trenches. Using data from the general bathymetric chart of the oceans, Line identified what he called a bright pixel anomaly in the ocean floor mapping, a single point of data suggesting something man-made or unusual on the sea floor. The coordinates: approximately 33.2 digs, 100.27 dig E, about 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, at a depth of around 5,750 to 6,000 meters. Line dubbed it the Penang Longitude Deep Hole, a narrow, steep-walled trench he believes would be a perfect hiding spot where wreckage could sink and remain trapped by the surrounding geography, explaining why so little debris has washed ashore. Line argues this wasn't random but deliberate, a pilot choosing the most remote, undetectable location possible. The longitude line, he notes, intersects precisely with the runway at Penang Airport, Captain Shah's hometown. The theory is intriguing but unverified. Aviation experts urge caution, noting the pixel could be a data artifact, a natural geological formation, or sonar noise. But it's compelling enough that the site overlaps with the current search area. Perhaps even more remarkable is the work of Richard Godfrey, a retired British aerospace engineer and physicist.
You believe you know exactly where MH370 is?
That's correct, yes.
So from the moment MH370 took off, you have been able to track its every movement?
Yeah, from takeoff right to the end.
Godfrey discovered something remarkable about how we might track aircraft retrospectively. Amateur radio operators, ham radio enthusiasts, transmit signals around the globe 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These signals crisscross the atmosphere in invisible waves, and when a large aircraft flies through those waves, it creates detectable disturbances in the radio signals, like ripples in a pond. Working backward through archived ham radio data from March 8, 2014, Godfrey claims he's been able to track MH370's entire flight path from takeoff to the moment it hit the ocean. His analysis identifies 160 separate detection points, each representing a disturbance in radio signals that occurred at a specific time and location, consistent with a large aircraft passing through.
I'm looking to try and detect anomalies in the signals reflected back from an aircraft. You can follow that data and you can see where an aircraft may have disturbed the radio signals, and you can pick up those disturbances.
What makes Godfrey's work particularly compelling is that his reconstructed flight path mirrors the satellite handshake data that's already been verified, but with far more precision and detail. And it reveals something extraordinary that the satellite data alone couldn't show. 3 hours into the flight, after turning south over the Indian Ocean, MH370 entered a holding pattern for 20 minutes, essentially circling in the sky. What we know. While investigators analyze data and debate theories, while autonomous vehicles scan the ocean floor and engineers review radio signals, there's a human dimension to this tragedy that often gets lost in the technical discussions, but never goes away for those who lived through it. Danica Weeks' husband, Paul, was on MH370. For more than 11 years now, she's lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to move forward because there's no grave to visit, no funeral to attend, no memorial service to mark the end, no definitive answer about what happened to the man she loved, the father of her children. She's not alone in this limbo. 153. Chinese families lost loved ones, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, grandparents. Malaysian families, Indonesian families, Indian, American, Canadian, French families. Families from across the world, united by a tragedy that defies comprehension and resolution. One Chinese relative captured the agony in a statement that appeared in news coverage. "We haven't even had any kind of memorial. I didn't even get to walk through a church with his photo and light a candle and kind of say this is over. No closure, no answers, no peace. Just an endless waiting, punctuated by false hopes and disappointing updates." These families have become advocates despite never wanting that role, demanding transparency from governments that have often been frustratingly opaque, pushing for continued searches when budgets and political will fade, refusing to let the world forget. In March 2025, families held vigils marking the 11th anniversary, still searching for answers, still demanding action. The wait has been made more agonizing by the careful, politically motivated language of official reports. The 495-page Malaysian Safety Investigation Report, released in 2018, was exhaustive in its technical analysis, but frustratingly inconclusive in its ultimate findings. The report confirmed what investigators already knew. The aircraft's path was manually altered by someone with aviation knowledge. Communication systems were deliberately disabled. The plane flew for approximately 7 hours after losing contact, before likely crashing after fuel exhaustion in the southern Indian Ocean. But the report stopped short of answering the central questions that families desperately needed answered. Who did this and why? The investigators concluded they could not determine the identity of the person who diverted the aircraft or establish a motive. They found no evidence of pilot misconduct that definitively proved Captain Shah or First Officer Hamid was responsible, though the circumstantial evidence pointing to the cockpit crew, particularly Shah, was substantial and widely acknowledged by investigators privately. This careful, legalistic language reflected political and legal realities. Definitively blaming Shah would expose Malaysia Airlines and the Malaysian government to massive liability claims from hundreds of families. Without the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, the black boxes that could tell us exactly what happened in those final hours, absolute certainty was legally impossible to claim. But many investigators believe they know what happened, even if they can't prove it beyond all doubt. If there's any positive outcome from this tragedy, it's the changes it sparked in aviation safety, tracking, and protocols. Before MH370, aircraft could fly for hours over oceans with minimal tracking beyond occasional satellite pings. The International Civil Aviation Organization responded by mandating that airlines implement real-time flight tracking systems. New regulations require aircraft to report their position at least every 15 minutes, and more frequently if they deviate from their planned route. Black box technology has improved. Newer underwater locator beacons last longer and transmit stronger signals. Some airlines now use deployable recorders that can eject from the aircraft during a crash, floating to the surface for easier recovery. Cockpit security protocols have been reviewed and enhanced to prevent single pilot scenarios where one person could lock out their colleague. But these changes came too late for the 239 people aboard MH370, and they can't answer the fundamental questions about what happened that night in March 2014. MH370 isn't the only commercial flight to vanish mysteriously, though it's certainly the most recent and baffling of the modern era. British South American Airways Stardust disappeared in 1947 over the Andes Andes Mountains. Its final radio message was the cryptic word Stendek, never satisfactorily explained. The wreckage was found 51 years later, in 1998, preserved by glacial ice, but the meaning of that final transmission remains a mystery. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 vanished in 1962 over the Western Pacific with 107 people aboard, 93 U.S. military personnel heading to Vietnam and crew. Despite extensive searches, no trace has ever been found. It remains the largest loss of life in a single aviation incident without any recovered wreckage. Aer Lingus Flight 712 disappeared in 1968 over the Irish Sea with 61 people aboard. Only a few seat cushions and an oil slick were ever found. As of this recording, the Ocean Infinity search that began in February 2025 continues its methodical scanning of the ocean floor. Using advanced autonomous underwater vehicles, robots capable of descending to crushing depths and mapping the sea floor with unprecedented precision, the company is searching a 15,000 square kilometer area under a no-find, no-fee contract, potentially worth $70 million if they locate the wreckage. The search is expected to last 18 months. If Richard Godfrey's ham radio analysis is validated through peer review, or if Vincent Line's broken ridge theory proves accurate, the search area could be refined further, dramatically increasing the chances of success. Peter Foley, who led the original Australian search operation for 4 years and remains obsessed with finding MH370, is cautiously optimistic. But sometimes, despite exhaustive investigations spanning years, despite hundreds of millions of dollars spent, despite advanced technology and the dedication of brilliant investigators, despite the desperate need of hundreds of grieving families, the answer remains frustratingly, agonizingly out of reach, somewhere in the dark depths of the ocean. The ocean keeps its secrets. The black boxes that could provide definitive answers remain lost, and 239 families continue their vigil, waiting for the day when their loved ones might finally be found and brought home, when the mystery might finally be solved, when they might finally have permission to grieve completely and begin the process of moving forward. Until that day comes, those 5 words remain suspended in time, a routine transmission that became an epitaph, marking the invisible boundary between normal life and incomprehensible tragedy. Good night, Malaysian 370, a calm, professional farewell that became the last communication from one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. The search continues through 2025 and beyond. Hope persists among investigators and families, flickering but never quite extinguished, and the world watches and waits, hoping the ocean will finally surrender its secrets and provide the answers that have eluded us for more than 11 years. Thanks for watching. Check out other card on the screen.